everyone. So today I'm going to start a chapter, The Rise of Nationalism in Europe. And this chapter will tell you that how did Europe disintegrate into nation states. Some points are there. Number one, what is a nationalism? Nationalism, as we know, it's a feeling for a nation. That is, you live for your nation, you love your nation, you die for your nation. Every cause is there for the betterment of your nation, that is nationalism. And it needs to be evoked. It is not like that it is not present in anyone. It is there in everyone, but it needs to be risen, it needs to be evoked. Now, the second question, as the name of the chapter is The Rise of Nationalism in Europe. So, how it came to Europe? It came to Europe from France. As we have studied French Revolution, and we know that it was in 1789, and France became a territorial state. It became republic. So, from France, we find nationalism to be spreading towards Europe and in different countries of Europe, and slowly all these countries they became a nation state. Now next point is Frederick Soro. This chapter starts with a painting of Frederick Soro. In 1848, a French scientist was there whose name was Frederick Soro, and he was the one to prepare a series of footprints because he had a dream. Now, what kind of dream? His dream was very different from the ordinary dream, and that we say it to be a utopian vision. Now, what is a utopian vision? A vision of a society that is so ideal that it is unlikely to actually exist. During that time, there were kingdoms, big empires, kings were ruling, monarchs were there. So at that time, the concept of nation state, it was not an ideal thinking. It was just a thinking which was so ideal that it may exist or could not exist. Now, if you look at the painting of Frederick Soro on the very first page of the chapter, you will find a number of people moving in a train because they are moving in sequence, and ultimately they are crossing the Statue of Liberty. They are crossing the Statue of Liberty. We find United States, Switzerland, they have already become nation states as they have crossed the Statue of Liberty. And next, the France is there, which is being followed by Germany and so on. Now, slowly, as these people got liberated and they turned into nation states, then came the concept of nation state. So, nation states came into existence after the breakage of multinational dynastic empires of Europe. Now, let me move further. We are on the very first point, the French Revolution and the idea of the nation. So, how did French Revolution give the idea for a nation? If you say that this is a nation, अगर हम ये कह दें कि ये nation है, तो कह देने पर से nation नहीं होता. One needs to evoke the feeling of nationalism to convert it into a nation. So the very first expression of nationalism which came was in French Revolution in 1789, and as a result we find France to be converted to a full-fledged territorial state. So the political and constitutional changes that came just because of French Revolution that transferred the rule of monarchy to a body of citizens. As a result, France became republic. So the revolution proclaimed that it was the people who are going to shape the destiny of the country. I have written in very short how did the rule move over in France. Firstly, Louis XVI was the one to rule. Then France became republic, National Assembly was in existence. Then came the Jacobean clubs. After the Jacobean clubs, we find Directory to be there. Directory was a body of five people, and as it was unstable, so ultimately Napoleon Bonaparte, who was the military general at that time, he became a dictator to the France and took over the control of the France. Now, let us proceed further with this chapter, The Rise of Nationalism in Europe and the French Revolution and the idea of the nation. In this slide, I have told you about French Revolution class 9. Now we are going to study the French Revolution and the idea of how did it emerge as a nation. Before that, let us study a little about Napoleon. We are going to repeat it. He became a dictator of France. After becoming a dictator of the France, he was the one to expand his territory. He believed in the expansion of the territory. He was against democracy. He did not favor democracy, but he was very good in administrative system. He believed that if the administrative system of a country is good, then ultimately either it be a kingdom is going to rise. So how nationalism spread in France, that is the point. So from the very beginning, the French revolutionaries, they have taken various measures to invoke the feelings of nationalism in France. The very first thing which they introduced was a concept of la patrie and la citoyen. La patrie, that is, it is a fatherland and we are the citizens of the country. Secondly, when France became democratic, the royal flag was being replaced by a new tricolor flag. Then, third one, National Assembly came into being, and we find the State General to be no more there. So the State General was elected by the body of active citizens. It was being renamed and was given a name of National Assembly. Hymns were composed, songs were sung, and national songs were sung, martyrs were commemorated, the people who died for the cause of the country, they were commemorated, and all these was done to evoke the feeling of nationalism within the country. Not only this, Napoleon made several changes. He introduced uniform laws, uniform weight, uniform measures. If you remember, children, in French Revolution, there were three states: first state, second state, third state. Now, first state and the second state, they enjoyed the privileges, and the third state, it was the one to bear the whole burden. So, internal custom duties which were being given by the third state in the form of taxes, either direct tax or indirect tax, that was abolished, and French language was promoted in each and every region. So these were the changes which were being introduced by revolutionaries to invoke the feeling of nationalism within the country so that France becomes a nation. Now, not only over here did the revolutionaries stop, they said that their mission is very big. They are not going to stop over there. Their mission is to liberate the peoples of Europe from despotism. In other words, you can say that they wanted Europe to disintegrate into nation states. Now, slowly, when the events which were occurring in France in different cities, they were carried to the different cities of the Europe. Students were the one, other members, educated elite of the middle class, they were the one to carry this idea, propagate this idea, because they had already made Jacobean clubs. So the activities which were being done, the campaigns which were being organized, they prepared a way for the French armies, and thus the French armies propagated or moved towards Holland, Belgium, Switzerland, and in Italy in 1790. Now, when you are going to enter any of the country, nobody is going to welcome you if you really want it to change politically. So, revolutionary wars were there, and the French armies, they slowly carried the idea of nationalism abroad. Now, what did this Napoleon do? Napoleon Bonaparte, who became the dictator to the France, he was the one to extend his territory, and at the same time he introduced various reforms. He was the one to introduce Civil Code 1804. I'm sorry, it is 1804. And Civil Code 1804 is also known by the name of Napoleonic Code, and it took away all the privileges of the birth. It established equality before law. It gave right to property. So this code did not only expand in France, but it was exported to each and every part which was under the control of the Napoleon. Napoleon was the one to abolish the feudal system, and thus he was the one to free the peasants from serfdom and manorial dues. He also removed the guilt restriction, and he was the one to improve transportation and communications. So when the new middle class found so much of changes, they enjoyed the liberty, though they knew very well that the country is no more democratic, because Napoleon was against democracy, but still they felt that the things are good because standard weights, standard measurements, and it became easy for them to propagate from one side to another. Slowly, slowly, they came to know that their freedom was not patching up with the political freedom, and later on, the taxes were increased, censorship was introduced, and forcefully the people were being asked to be a part of French armies. So the changes which were being made by Napoleon were very less as compared to the things which were being taken away by the people politically. Thank you. 1.1 is completed. The whole unit 1 is completed.